Friday afternoon, folks. We're live in downtown Honolulu. Ted Ralston here, your host on the show Where the Drone Leads. For our benefit of our guests, it used to be Where the Road Leads, but we figured out it's going to be drones, not roads, so we changed the name. Anyway, once again, here we are with a fantastic panel of guests on our show Where the Drone Leads. Let me introduce our newcomers to the show, Dr. Cathy Cahill.
Nice to meet you.
And you are from?
University of Alaska Fairbanks, the Alaska Center for Unmanned Aircraft Systems Integration.
Is there anything more you can add to your title than that to make it longer?
I can add CEO and Chairman of the Board of the Pan-Pacific UAS Test Range Complex.
Wow, say that real loud and slow. The Chairman of the Board.
And CEO of the Pan-Pacific UAS Unmanned Aircraft Systems Test Range Complex.
We're going to talk about that on this show later on. That's a fantastic title. Is it, maybe you could shorten it somehow so it can fit on your business card?
PPU-TRC.
PPU-TRC. Okay, great, Cathy. Thanks for coming on board. By the way, you are the fifth person we've had from that same center on this very show. We've had Ro Bailey, we've had Leonard Lejeune, we've had Peter Wembley, we've had Marty Rogers, and now you. So we've had 5 people from Alaska in that center on this show. And that's a high percentage of the population of Alaska all at once on this show, which is pretty cool. We have Clayton Inskeep, out of Kailua, which is a good place to be in or out of.
Correct.
There, back to sometime. And Clayton, you're with Drone Aviation.
Drone Aviation, yeah, we're a commercial operator based out of California. We have 2 operations. We have a California operation, Nevada operation, and we're in the process of standing up an operation here in the islands.
That's great. So you are an exponent of this emerging drone technology and capability.
As much as possible.
As much as possible,
yeah. We've become a little bit hamstrung with FAA regulations, but we're patiently pushing our way forward through that and becoming more of, unfortunately, doing a lot more lobbying with the FAA and the government than flying right now, but things are changing every day.
That's not a bad thing, and that's what part of the PPU-TRC is all about. So we'll see how those come together here. We can talk later on. And we have General Darryll Wong, who's a frequent flyer on the show. Has spent many hours above 2.38 EPR, pushing airplanes through the sky. Darryll, welcome aboard. And you're now acting in yet another role, which is the
Senior Advisor to the UH Applied Research Lab.
UH Applied Research Lab. And that is, can you explain a little bit about the research lab and how that might fit into the world of UAS and drones?
Well, the research lab is a part of the university, but they're more an innovative side. So a lot of new things that come into the university, they can do a lot of research and look at things. So, you know, UAS is sensors and things, it's a perfect place to entry point into the university.
That's great. So that could be the center function for the UH that applies with the PPU-TRC consortium in executing university's role in that growth and the state's role for that matter.
But that'll be a decision of the leadership of the UH, but that's what the Applied Research Labs do.
That's what it
do
can
a lot
do.
of innovating and research.
And that's what Clay needs in order for his business to succeed, is for us to work prototypes and things like that at the university level and then roll it over to a commercial operator and find where the real issues are and go forward. And we have our last guest on the table. This is a Gatewing X100. It's been on this table many times. This is interesting. This is sort of an example of maybe 5 years ago's level of technology. It's hard to believe that in 5 years something could be out of date. But in this game of UAS, or unmanned air systems and drones, 5 years is a lifetime. And so this is actually a professional mapping system. Believe it or not, about $50,000 to buy this kit, which is 2 airplanes and some electronics and cameras and some processing software. But we're going a lot beyond that this day and age. So this is a very fast-moving technology, which is why the university is an important element here, and why we need the commercial operators to define what their needs are so that they can feed back into the university, get the work done, and move forward. So, we've had this kind of discussion many times on this show. We've never had this particular composition of folks on the table: a user, an observer from a technology point of view, an executor from a technology point of view, and someone who's trying to control the whole thing from the large scale of a FAA compliant test site. So tell us a little bit, Cathy, if you can, a little bit about Alaska's expression of UAS test site. How does that come to play? What does it look like?
Well, Alaska's been a long-term player in terms of unmanned aircraft. So we started working airspace issues back in 2001. We got our
Yeah.
first aircraft in 2006, and that doesn't sound like a
If I could
humongously
interject for a
long
moment, you
period.
said work the airspace problems. That's so cool. You're not working the vehicle, you're working the airspace. That's the part that needs to be started from. The user's needs and then the other elements of the airspace that need to be taken care of. Then you can figure out what the, I didn't mean to interrupt you that much. But by the way, we allow interruptions, we allow controversy. We have security standing by if anybody wants to get some real controversy going here. And controversy sells, success doesn't. So let's be controversial if we can here.
Yep, so 2006, we got our first aircraft. It was the Scan Eagle. And since then, we've done a wide range of missions, from looking at marine mammals to studying wildfires to actually working with the FAA to safely integrate unmanned aircraft into the airspace. And that's really where the test site originated. The FAA and Congress are working to safely integrate these, autonomous systems. How do you get them in there without threatening manned aviation? Because whatever we do, we want to make sure that it's safe. U.S. has some of the safest airspace. We want to keep it there. So there are 6 test sites in the country, and the Pan-Pacific UAS Test Range Complex, PPUTRC, is Alaska, Hawaii, and Oregon. And it was a great teaming because we offer a diversity of climates and conditions, but some similar challenges. So we do a lot of maritime work. That's something Hawaii is very interested in. We've got volcanoes. Ours aren't quite as sexy as yours, but we have some volcanoes. Oregon has volcanoes. There are a lot of similarities here, and having that diversity of climates, but with a lot of similar challenges, lets us work together very, very easily. So we competed for a test site. We got one as the series of 3 states, and we've been in the process of standing up the various ranges so people can bring challenges to us. They can bring aircraft to us to test. We can try new scientific payloads, and so we are looking at pictures. Are we looking at synthetic aperture radar? All of these things give us pieces of information to understand our surroundings. And when you want to use unmanned aircraft, it's when it's dirty, dull, and dangerous. So instead of flying manned helicopters through the Snake River Canyon in Idaho, where they had 2 fatalities, 2 accidents, 1 with fatalities, you can now put an unmanned aircraft in the air in that canyon. You have now made it a whole lot safer to do the studies that they need to do to manage their resource.
So safety is one of the factors that's going to make this business grow. If we can get the job done safer with the unmanned system, even if it's more expensive, it would make sense if it's safer. And we might find that the expense of some of these may be actually higher if you have to put a specialist forward with the group as you don't have today. But safety, that's an interesting and important aspect. So what we need to do is figure out how that concept of the dull, dangerous, and dirty work can be done safer here in Hawaii, in the environment we have, with the tropical conditions, the high winds, the Ko'olau Mountains, and the search and rescue that needs to be taken care of there, the search and rescue in ocean drowning situations, and any kind of maritime domain awareness activities, and even environmental work and this sort of thing, where that can be done safer to start with. Whether it's cheaper or not is a secondary issue. If it can be done safer with unmanned aircraft, that's what we have to focus on. And that means volcanic issues, that means tsunamis, that means floods, landslides, all those things can be perceived and looked at in a way that we probably can get more information than we can get today, because it is safer to go in there with an unmanned aircraft and pull information out.
And sometimes you actually get better data too.
Let's talk about that in a minute. But Clay, you were...
Well, that's one of the goals of our company, is to help save lives. We've done a lot of speaking and a lot of research in the industry, and we found that there's a lot of jobs that require people to be put in harm's way, just to do a basic job, a dull and dangerous job. And we've also found that there's lots of wives and lots of husbands that wouldn't mind taking a few $1,000s a year pay cut to not have to climb up a 400,000 volt electrical line to inspect an insulator. There's any number of jobs that the UAS systems can assist in taking people out of harm's way for infrastructure, for inspecting bridges, for inspecting our crumbling infrastructure in this country. All of those things that people generally get put in harm's way, we're trying to push that envelope using UASs to not just save lives, but to prevent people from being put in situations where they can get hurt.
So taking that as a lead, and taking the idea of the Pan-Pacific Unmanned Air Systems Test
Range Complex.
Test Complex.
Good job.
You PPUTRC and the role that University of Hawaii will be playing in that, along with University of Alaska. We need to take those user needs that you just expressed and find a way that they fit the aspects of infrastructure work here or environmental work here in Hawaii, and begin doing testing and doing experimentation in ways that would allow systems, unmanned systems, to operate in that environment in conjunction with existing manned systems or whatever systems we have today, and also evaluate the sensors and the analytic software and such that makes it all happen in the communication system, the whole picture, the whole ecosystem. That's what our challenge is in finding the Hawaii component of PPUTRC. Darryll, in terms of the research component here, what this implies is a strong group of researchers that we can get access to through ARL that are ready to step in and suggest things in the area of agriculture or coastal geology or various scientific examinations of the environment. And so the structure of ARL really allows that, does it not? It's designed for that.
Yeah, because the UAS, years ago we had this big meeting here on drones and things, and a lot of discussion was it's only a platform. I mean, it's a platform that can carry anything. So all the innovation and the science that can be done that would need sensors or things above ground or offshore, these things can do it quickly, cheaper. And then the researcher doesn't need to learn how to fly these things. You could use a commercial entity or the university, like how Alaska set it up. It has its own fleet of planes to do the kind of help the researchers get the data quickly without them having all to learn how to fly these things.
That is a really interesting perspective. What you're saying is that every time you say something, I have to process it for a while, then repeat it back in my way because it's so revolutionary. But rather than have each researcher who wants to use a UAS or UAV or drone become competent in flying it and operating it and maintaining it and getting his FAA certification, have a group of people who already have that characteristic and credential, let them take care of the operation, and let that researcher develop the payload, the processing offline, and this sort of thing. Let him be part of the team, but don't burden him with the need to pick up the whole enchilada.
In dovetailing on that, we, as a commercial operator and doing a lot of education of end users, is let's take the verbiage of drone or UAS out of it and call it a tool. It's a tool. It's another tool in your toolbox. It's not a crescent wrench. It can't do everything, but it is another tool that you can use to get a job done. And when you think of it that way, you hire a carpenter to build a house. You don't, as a contractor, you don't have to know how to do it all yourself. So using them as tools rather than thinking of it as an aircraft or a platform, thinking of it as a tool, I think is key going forward and getting acceptance of the tool.
It's just another tool. In fact, if I can suggest, it's an ecosystem of tools that have different natures. Some are physical, some are analytical, and some are expressive in terms of putting information out. Some are predictive. There's a lot of modeling and simulation. And I think what you just said is something really interesting. I was thinking about this on the way in. We always bring some kind of drone to our table here. We've done this for a year and a half or two. We probably should put a toolbox on this table and it not highlight the drone itself, highlight the fact that there's that information that can be processed and somebody can get his job done better by virtue of this. The fact that it's a UAV or UAS is really our job to worry about, not the users.
And you just hit another point that's part of what one of the mountains we're climbing is a job. Okay, because as a commercial operator, the first thing that happens when we start discussing drones is people start looking over their shoulder and wondering where their job's going to be in a couple of years, rather than it being an asset to them. And so a huge part of our job is explaining that we're not taking jobs away. We're supplementing.
That's a really interesting point. And let me just, we're going to take our first break here and come right back after that. We'll see if the prop department, Zuri, can we get a toolbox in here for the next segment and get this airplane off the table? Thanks a lot.
Can I say two things? Learning
We're on
from...
break now.
Oh, okay.
Aloha, my name is Richard Emery, host of Condo Insider. More than a third of Hawaii's population live in some form of association, and our show is all about educating board members and owners about their responsibilities and obligations and providing solutions for a great association. You can watch me live on Thursdays, 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. each week. Aloha.
Aloha, my name is Justine Espiritu, and I am the co-host of Hawaii Farmers Series. This is my co-host, Matthew Johnson, and we are live with you every Thursday at 4 p.m. at thinktechhawaii.com. And our show focuses on Hawaii's local food community. We feature not only the farmers that are producing our food, but we also feature the supporters and other folks involved in the community that are trying to promote local agriculture.
Aloha and welcome to Think Tech Hawaii. I am Ina Chang. I am the guest host for Small Business Hawaii with Reg Baker. Tune in every Thursday at 2 p.m. and watch us. Aloha.
I'm Jay Fidel, and I'm the host of Research in Manoa, Mondays from 12 to 1 on thinktechhawaii.com. Take a look at us and learn about geophysics, learn about planetology, learn about the ocean and earth sciences at UH Manoa. You'll really enjoy it. So come around, we'll see you then.
We're live, folks. Second segment of our show, Where the Drone Leads, here on the 20th of May, 2016, downtown Honolulu, 8th floor of the Pioneer Plaza building. You can see by the background, we're sitting right downtown here with Waimanalo in the background. Good place to be. Anyway, welcome to our show again. Dr. Cathy Cahill. Kathy, thanks so much for coming on. Darryll, always a pleasure, sir.
Yep.
And Clayton Inskeep, newcomer to the show. And our prop department has succeeded in getting us a toolbox here on the table over the break, which was really important because we were making the point that we got to stop thinking about just the drone itself. We got to think about the fact that it's one of a series of tools that a tradesman has to perform a mission, or an analyst, or whatever it might be. In fact, another good point, and this is the point you bring up all the time, is that we also have to realize that a drone has with it a ground station, and it's got a communication system in between the ground station and the flying element, and it's got all the support elements on the ground that are required that would otherwise be in the cockpit of an airplane. So it's really a more expanded picture.
Well, it's in the name, unmanned aircraft
Unmanned aircraft system,
systems.
which contains an unmanned aircraft vehicle, as well as a ground station, comms, and everything else. So the management of this more complex system, this is actually a harder job than managing manned aircraft. Manned aircraft is all self-contained in the cockpit, and as anyone here who's a pilot knows, that's all you need. You got the steam gauges in case the ICAS goes out. You can fly the thing on.
Well, they're all glass cockpits now, so.
They still have the steam gauges in
Yeah.
there for whenever the glass doesn't work.
And the compass, and
Yep, and you can get them home. So anyway, Kathy, looking at the nature of these as a complex system with all this interdependence and such, coming up with the rules and coming up with the standards that you must execute in order to have a safe and reliable program is not an undaunting task.
It's not an undaunting task, and it requires a team. Anyone who's doing unmanned aircraft work is a part of a team. So in my case, I have 23 folks right now who are directly associated with our program. And it's a case of we need to have engineers who are working on the payloads. We need to have the pilots who are trained, full manned pilots. They operate safely in manned airspace. They know the rules. We have an airspace expert who works with the FAA to get us permission to fly in the national airspace. We have operations managers. We've got data processing folks. It is a real team effort. So someone will come into us and say, I want to do research on polar bears. And we'll say, okay, what season, what are you looking at? What kind of area are you covering? Are you looking for the heat signature? Are you looking for a visual picture? And with all of that, the team will break it down into what the various components are and see what needs to happen in order to make that work. So we like to say we're platform agnostic. We'll fly anything. We want the right platform with the right payload to achieve the right mission. And the whole team has to pull together to understand what that combination is. Because it's not just one thing. We can't just have one wrench in our toolbox. We need to have a suite of wrenches in the toolbox.
That's pretty cool. And I'm learning so much about this, and I'm just thinking back to the ARL situation. That's kind of how ARL works today, isn't it? It has...
Innovate.
It innovates, but it has a core of expertise that makes sure that when you innovate, we don't stray off into some area that's going to get us in trouble. So you have experts, you have resources you can call upon, you have some degree of control. We just don't have UAS in it today. But that's a great framework upon which to install the UAS functionality and bring in the UAS control to make sure, because of the additional the three-dimensional aspects and the air traffic, national airspace aspects, that we don't have any problems. But the two are making more sense in my mind every time we have a conversation. And this is really interesting because I'm just repeating it now, but at the university level, a core functionality that can perform all of what you outlined, all the steps required to make something happen, can be the same from project to project to project. If it's Hawaiian studies, if it's archaeology, if it's coastal geology, it's the same basic process, same basic team. Different payload, different analysis process, and different result being published in some other different area perhaps, and maybe sponsored by some different organization that wants the information. But
It's providing data back to them with different types of sensors, whether it be visual, whether it be multispectral. I mean, it's just, as Kathy was saying, you just put the different payloads and you get the data that you need.
the model here is
How
the football
fast?
team. We have the university, we have an obligation to put 66 people on a bus somewhere and get them to a stadium. We use the same 66 people all the time. We give them equipment, give them some training, call them football players. That's the same model. We wouldn't randomly grab people that don't have any football training and put them on the field. Same thing here. We don't want to grab people randomly. We want to have them controlled and have them seasoned and have them relatively polished in what they do.
But to follow that metaphor, you don't necessarily change your quarterback with a defense lineman. So you don't necessarily swap your pilot for your engineer. So people really do kind of have their areas of expertise.
They have their tasking.
And
right?
they bring it forward, and that way you know that so-and-so is always handling command and control. You have consistency. They've worked up the methods. They understand them inside and out. And the result is you have far fewer failures.
And this is interesting because this brings credibility and it brings repeatability, trust, and confidence, and it protects the reputation. We have to protect our reputation, and you, of course, can't in any way be sullied by our reputation. So if we're tying together University of Alaska and University of Hawaii, we have to perform in a way that matches the expectations you've got so that your reputation is maintained. We can't have a backslide here in that domain. And this all sounds like it's a perfect setup for Hawaii's element in PPUTRC. It's the same exact picture. If in PPUTRC, we're going to need the same body of expertise, the same body of confidence and credibility and certification. We're going to need the same capability. It looks the same. If you look at it from a distance, what we're doing at UH and what we're doing for the state ought to be the same.
It is.
Is that the same in Alaska?
It is, and it's a function of people working together. We don't need to keep recreating the wheel.
Mhm.
We've got a lot of talented
Yeah.
folks across industry. We've got them in government. We have them in universities. And transferring best practices and knowledge of FAA rules and all of these other things is going to mean the industry as a whole, which is very young and people are very skeptical of, will advance. Whereas if we have bad actors and things go wrong, then you're going to end up with a very poor reputation. People are not going to be confident in what we're doing. So it's very important that we work together across all of these fronts to make sure that everybody is operating safely and standards are held to.
Let me throw another thought in that. So, in the airline industry, they
Gerald,
took
you're
a lot
allowed
of-
only one thought per program because they're too
Okay,
big for us
I'll
to
get-
handle. No.
Kathy and I are great friends. No. So, in the past, a lot of your pilots of the airlines came out of the military. You have so many UAV pilots now in the military, in all services. So as this thing grows, once they retire, you have a workforce that has all this experience from what they've done in 12 years.
We can
of-
put veterans to work.
And I have.
There's another good idea. That should,
So, and that then leads to the discussion of how, let's take the Air Force, for example, how they manage, or the Army, it doesn't matter, how they manage their unmanned air system programs. They've solved a lot of these problems. Now, admittedly, they do it overseas, they do it in a combat situation or a surveillance situation, they don't do it domestically. But nevertheless, the notion of making sure it's going to work, making sure the mission is understood and all the pieces are in place legally to do the mission, we could learn a lot from that, transfer that from either the Army or the Air Force, modify it in some way to bring it into the civil environment.
Well,
that's exactly right.
The thing that you just really hit the nail on the head is the military does things in a very methodical and specific way. There's a standard operating procedure for almost everything they do, including maintenance, which is a huge part of the military doctrine. And that's one of the things that, as a new industry, we run the risk of complacency, of assuming that these units that are being mass produced are up to the qualifications of QC of a military outfit or of an FAA standard. And we, as the leaders and the new people in this industry, we have to be absolutely 100% sure that we are following our own wishes and in the guidelines to make sure that the craft are safe. Multi-rotors, quadcopters, if one of the motors stops working, then the thing falls out of the sky. And the first time one of them falls out of the sky and hits somebody, then we're going to have a big problem. So the burden is on us as an industry to make sure that we are treating them as the aircraft that they are. Now they're a tool, but they're also an aircraft, and they carry payloads, and they can be up to 55 pounds. Well, if something 55 pounds gets out of control and hits somebody, it's going to be a big problem. And so we really have to be sure that we're not just following the airspace restrictions. We're not just following the LOAs and the COAs and our Section 333 exemptions and what we get from the FAA, but we're taking upon ourselves the impetus to make sure that our equipment is inspected properly, to make sure that if there's damage, that it's repaired, that they're tested, that the firmware is updated, the software is updated. There's a large burden on our shoulders to make sure that we are operating safely, because part of the public's perception of these right now is they're toys, and that they're scared of them. They're the black rifles of 2016 is drones. People think they're snooping over their backyards. The public in general is scared of them. Well, they're going to be more scared of them if we don't take it upon ourselves to make sure that they're safe.
And that's interesting because one of the roles that the university has to perform under the leadership that you provided in Alaska and our state PPUTRC function, whichever it is in both, has to respect all of those safety issues and all those certifications. And that's one of the things you provide as part of the university structure.
It is indeed. We can provide best practices, we can work with folks in industry, and we're constantly evolving this. This is something that as the technology develops and we get more data on it, we're going to be operating more safely and more consistently across the industry.
And
So the thought in this is, all the FAA
Darryll,
regulations.
one bright idea. No, I'm sorry.
No, it's just I just want to make a statement. All the FAA regulations are written in blood because of an
Yes,
accident.
right.
So what he just said is that the people that are the pioneers now have to be very careful, because if they start crashing these things, you're going to start loading on regulations that you don't even need. And it's because of complacency or some other things. So that's why, Alaska and some of these other things, you're really in the lead to make sure this thing is safe, because they're going to start clamping regulations on it if you don't do that.
And I'll say, a lot of people have this same phone that I have, and they don't have any problems with it. I have problems with mine. So there's a quality control problem with my phone. Well, a lot of these drones are being mass produced, and we don't know what the factories look like. We don't know what the qualifications of the people that are making them. We don't know what standards they're being held to. So it falls on us to make sure that we are on top of that, and we test and we evaluate. And in our company's procedure is we don't turn a drone loose until we've got 20 hours of flight time on it to see if there's any anomalies in the way that it operates.
This is a fantastic point to bring up the next point, which we'll discuss after our next break. But I'd like to have the prop department come up with a no complacency table tent for us, if we can, here to replace our toolbox, Zuri. But we'll come back and talk about that after the next break.
Aloha, namaskar, and hello. I am Anu Hittel, and I host a show on climate change. It's called Climate Change Beyond Outrage. And in it, we go beyond outrage to look at solutions to global climate problems facing people, nations, and the world. Join me every Tuesday at 1 o'clock Hawaii Standard Time. Aloha, namaskar, and goodbye.
Aloha! How you doing? It's me, Angus McTech, wishing you to welcome and join us to see us on Hibachi Talk on Think Tech Hawaii. Join my co-hosts, Gordo the Tech Czar and Andrew the Security Guy, every Friday from 1300 to 1345. We look forward to seeing you. We'll talk tech and we'll have some wee bit of fun. And remember, let your wing gang free wherever you be. Aloha!
Got something.
Once again, folks, Friday afternoon, downtown Honolulu. Ted Ralston here with our fantastic panel on Where the Drone Leads. Dr. Cathy Cahill,
Good to see you.
Darryll Wong, and Clayton
Another
Inskeep.
handshake.
Another handshake, right. That's what we do a lot of. You have to read the cards. Thanks for appearing on Think Tech, join the conversation. Thanks for having me on the show. It's all here. That's how it works. Anyway, this was a great discussion that we came to just before break. The issue of not being complacent, and what the other side of that is being diligent and being observant of all the rules that aviation has learned to grow up on, very few of which are actually transported into the world of UAS and drones these days, because they're really coming out of the cell phone business and the model airplane business, which avoided the certification process we're in love with on the airplanes. And that is significant what sites can have, and that is to, I'll just put words in your mouth, but that is to instill in everyone that discipline and that order and that management through standard practices, short of the certification requirements which are coming forth. But as certification requirements come forth out of the FAA and such, then we have to adopt them as well. The state sites could lead in the development of that process. That's an interesting, is that what you think of at Alaska?
That's actually what we're doing. And that is really the purpose of the test site, is develop the data,
Bingo.
the policies and procedures of getting these unmanned aircraft safely integrated in the national airspace. The more applied work is coming through the FAA Center of Excellence, and that will be then leading into all of the research projects, how do you use it for precision agriculture, how do you use it for these other things. But the test sites themselves really are for testing and evaluation. We're developing the data that makes the safety case that says, yeah, it is safe to fly this unmanned aircraft at this speed over this type of terrain.
So the test sites then would should be loaded up to the gills. I got that analogy a little bit wrong. Loaded up, doing testing as much as they can, feeding the information, good or bad, and both, to the FAA, let the FAA perceive it all, and use that as part of the framework for how to decide what kind of regulations are needed in the future.
And unfortunately, they're underutilized right now.
Okay.
The test sites are not being used in the spirit that I feel that the FAA meant them to be used. I know the Oregon test site, it's vacant most of the time. Now, one of the things that as a commercial operator we're required to do is there's 31 different hoops we have to jump through, quote unquote, before we launch. And one of the things that we have to do on a monthly basis is report all of our flights, the NOTAM numbers, if we had any anomalies, if there was any incidents, if we had lost links. And so the FAA is compiling data. So they're compiling data whenever we take off, whenever we land, and once a month we have to put a package forth to tell what happened. And a lot of people think that it just goes into a mailbox that gets dumped in the ocean. But actually there are, if there's not a person looking at it, there is a bot that the FAA has that's going through and pulling data out of there that they're compiling right now. And the FAA gets a really bad rap from commercial operators. Myself, when I first started this, I thought, oh, geez, I'm going to get my Section 333 exemption, then go to work and make a lot of money. And once I realized there was a lot of hoops to jump through and there was a lot of regulations, I got a little bit sour. And I grew out of that because I realized that we are developing this. This is our baby. And it's our responsibility to do it properly and to make the right reports and to be honest. If there's an incident, if we do have a lost link, it's not something that we did, it's the technology. And we've luckily never had one because we're on top of our maintenance and on top of our firmware and on top of our battery cycling and all the different things that can cause points of failure. As the general knows, very few aviation accidents are caused by one thing. They're caused by multiple things that may have happened weeks, months, years before, or operating procedures that aren't followed properly.
And that leads into an incredible part of the business, and that's the forward propagation of errors and all the math modeling that really looks at complex adaptive systems interacting, which I think is what we really need to get into in modeling and simulation to really figure out this whole future.
And both the NASA and FAA are working on that pretty diligently.
But let me take these fantastic discussions that have come forth and ask a question for each of you to respond to. What would, taking all this internally, how would you then translate that into what the Hawaii component of the Pan-Pacific UAS Test and Research Center ought to look like, say 5 years from now, or some point in time when it's been fairly well up and running and flushed out, not to the start, but what would be a good up and running configuration? Let me start with Cathy, because You've done that up in Alaska already. Done it for 15 years in Alaska.
Well, what I would see is, first off, strong partnerships with industry, government, university, really moving forward to do the research and the safety needed in the state of Hawaii. The technology is advancing incredibly quickly. So things, as you said, with the gate wing, that's 5 years old. It's already basically obsolete. Things are advancing very, very quickly. Things are getting smaller, they're getting lighter, we're getting longer endurance. All of these things mean that you're constantly trying to keep up here. I think we will see a lot fewer, actually, commercial operators, because a lot of the ones who just jumped in it and were not playing by the rules have fallen by the wayside, and the good operators will survive. I think we will see a move towards larger aircraft, longer endurance, being able to go further out, doing beyond line of sight work, where you don't actually have to have your eyes on it. It's more autonomous. All of these things are good, and I think in terms of search and rescue and other things, you're going to be looking at potentially being able to pick somebody up or drop things off to them and find them from cell phone links. And there's a lot of benefit to this. Of course, it has to be done carefully, and the rate at which we're moving, that is a challenge.
So what we could do is take what you just outlined and tie it to Department of Emergency Management here in the state of Hawaii and think of some prototyping and think of some very early entry-level functionalities to begin to test how this all works.
Yeah, I mean, I see the future, whether it be the university or private entity or even some local government, and some states have that kind of stuff also, is that you have a fleet of these things, varying in size, varying in capacity to payloads, so they can fly at different heights, different lengths of time, and use them, whether it be for emergency management, for maritime surveillance, for search and rescue, because you can get them out very quickly. So it's kind of, I see the future of people will have a fleet of these things as a tool to use in differing times, whether it be disasters, research, or search and rescue.
And it's up to us at the PPUTRC level to make sure that thing is safe and reliable and does the mission, and has to be very simple. We can't expect people to be heavily trained. It's got to be no different than a cell phone to operate when you're.
Well, I see they're going to be specially trained. You're going to have a group of people that specialize.
Okay, so we have two different points of view there.
Well,
Explain.
because of the size of these
Well, I'm going
things.
to go out on a limb here and answer your question. I don't.
It's the first time on this show anybody's ever.
I know.
Oh, you say
figured-
controversy is good.
I
okay.
figured
Security.
I'm going to throw that in there. I don't think, and this is a personal view, I don't think that the test ranges are going to last much longer. I think that the burden of testing is going to fall on operators like myself. And I think we are going to be the ones that are out in the field that are giving the information. Because test ranges are placed where they are, so they're in low density population areas. They're in very enclosed, they're very safe to operate on purpose. And that's not necessarily the type of data that is going to need to be collected in the future. We're going to need to know what happens in austere circumstances. We're going to need to know what happens next to the coalhouse. The Alaska test range and the Nevada test site and the Oregon test site, they're out in the middle of the high deserts. That's not necessarily useful for actual uses of what drones and UASs are going to be used for going forth.
Okay,
And
I'm
so-
going to disagree with you on this.
Good, I like that.
So with the test ranges, we've been given blanket 400-foot COA across the United States. We are flying closer. We are pushing the boundaries. So we will be flying closer to crowds. We will be flying in the closer to structures. So we're developing the safety case to allow FAA to let us work in areas that are highly populated with extreme winds around buildings, all those other things.
And I appreciate what you're saying.
We're doing the baby steps to get there.
But I'm
which
doing
you-
it today.
Yeah.
We're not working in cities and working near populated areas or working near people. I'm doing it right now. Instead of having to take baby steps to do it, that's what I do for a living. And so the information that we're able to give the FAA as far as how we're doing it today and how we're operating, what our limitations are, what the dangers could be, isn't something that we're looking at in the future. It's something I'm looking at tomorrow.
But you have to play by the same rules we do.
We do.
And so we're doing the same things. But, in terms of the waivers and crowds and other things, we're doing it. And so, you saying you're doing it today, so are we.
Yeah.
So, but the FAA is looking at extending the test sites 5 years by congressional mandate. We will be doing the austere stuff, et cetera. There aren't many Section 333s who fly in Alaska in the middle of winter. For military purposes, with Russians acting the way they are, this is going to be something that's going to be important. So we can test those austere environments and things where a commercial operator really would be at a serious disadvantage.
Let's take this on. We have the blanket COA for the whole state, which is going to be a really cool thing. Take your experience and figure out how to jam in those more austere issues and tie them together. We have a tweet here. If I was younger, I could probably read better. What's more likely to be adopted mainstream use first, driverless cars or UAS? Can we have a quick opinion on that from, let's start with
UAS.
Cathy.
UAS are mainstream right now.
Yeah, we're already doing it.
And you can't
There
go
you
buy
go.
a driverless
Right.
car at Best Buy.
Yeah, right, there you go. There's the answer. Okay.
Well, I think a component in all of this, again, is you're going to have to learn climatology. If you're going to fly close to mountains, depending if
Amen.
you're on the lee or the wind side, it's going to tumble. I mean,
So you've just outlined one of the functions of the Hawaii State Site, is to
Right.
operate in that austere environment at 2,000 footprint at updrafts and 4,000 down and 35 knot winds. Perfect. And we could talk about this forever. We're at the point where apparently we're out of time. We've run our time right down. I want to thank you very much for coming on, because the discussions are necessary so we can correctly figure out how the university is going to be constructed and how we're going to construct the state UAS test site. I like the ideas of pushing in terms of take the extremes of where the commercial operators are today and put that into our kit bag and challenge us that way. I like the broad COA we can get into and the rapid action we can get into. And I really like the idea that Darryll brought to us of ARL. It's already got the structure. It's the place to be. And we could even, through you, bring in National Guard, bring in our military experience that's useful in mission planning and such. So it all goes together, and we can use that as a starting point to define what our state UAS test site functionality should look like in conjunction with Alaska. So, final comments. Cathy, thanks very much for coming on.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to working and developing Hawaii.
Darryll?
thanks, Ted.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope to bring the
Right, one more.
operational aspects into this thing.
Okay.
And I thought that one great thing about the Hawaii and Alaska partnership is if you look at the map, they're right next to each other.
They are.
And you
They're
can
only
drive there from
different by
California.
3,000 miles of Kalea airspace. Anyway, at this point, we'll sign off and see you again next Friday, folks.